49-year-old Frank Hernandez, the guy right there in the mask, he's charged with assault under color of authority. He pleaded not guilty. He's on home assignment. This is the video from a bystander and some cameras worn by another officer. It shows Hernandez pummeling the man on April 27th as he stood with his hands behind his back as if he was going to be handcuffed. Joining us now to talk about all of this and a whole lot more is the District Attorney of LA County, Jackie Lacey. Ms. District Attorney, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, so you've heard from the activists. You know that they are grateful that these charges are coming, but they say, why now? Why in the middle of the George Floyd uproar? Why in the middle of a re-election campaign are we seeing these charges? What do you say to that?
The truth is, no one's been paying attention to what I've been doing. This is the 23rd excessive force case that has been filed under my administration, and no one's covered any of the others. But the truth is we've been doing this all along. And the big picture is that it is difficult to prosecute these cases. This case was relatively simple. We had all of the videotape available. We had witnesses to this who were willing to come forward. We had the body cam video. And this case is a lot simpler than a lot of the cases that have caught controversy. It was clear that the person who was being assaulted was not resisting.
Speaking of the body cam, yes, Alex, you want to ask that question?
Yeah.
We were wondering before the show.
Okay. So we're seeing that body cam. The person who's not arrested right now is the other officer who stood there and watched this happen. That was a big part of the George Floyd case. Why are these officers standing there and doing nothing? Why is that officer who did nothing while all this was happening, why isn't that officer facing any sort of penalties?
We're having a technical thing.
Yeah.
Jackie, you still with us?
I can hear you now.
There you go.
Yes.
Did you hear Alex's question?
No, I didn't.
Okay, why don't you do it, Dr. Drew?
Well, he was asking, before the camera heated up today, we were thinking, my goodness, we're so used to seeing these reality shows where there's some unknown person behind the camera. But in this case, the person behind the camera was a police officer, and this was his or her body cam. Should that officer be held accountable for omission here?
Well, when you say accountable, remember my lane is criminal liability part of it. And we looked at her conduct. We examined it very carefully. We could not prove any crime that she committed. The body camera was on. I'm grateful that it was. Part of the body camera footage also came from Officer Hernandez's camera, as well as this bystander who really caught a lot of it also. So we evaluated her part, could not prove anything that proved criminal conduct. Her conduct, of course, may be morally not right, but it did not rise to a level of a crime.
So what's the message that other officers should take away from that, the fact that she isn't facing any charges?
I think the message ought to be that many agencies, such as the agency that reports to me, we encourage officers, first of all, to intervene and also to report uses of force by their partner officers. I don't think that what happened here will encourage her, of course, to continue with this conduct. And I would say that most of the officers that we deal with do, in fact, report crimes that happen. So I would not expect that the failure for us to prosecute her in this case would have that impact.
All right, let's talk about, the main criticism of you from many of these Black Lives Matter activists that are outside your office protesting is they feel that you do not prosecute enough police officers. And so I spoke to some of them and I said, well, what's the main case that you're interested in? And many of them talked to me about this case. We want to put some pictures up on your screen of Kenneth Ross. He was in Gardena back in 2018, and he was shot and killed by a police officer. There were some reports at the time of gunfire in the area. Police were searching for a man meeting his description. And recently we've seen some newly released body cam video of that shooting. We want to warn people that it's graphic to watch. but we also think that it's important for people to watch to understand the story. Here it is.
Put your hands up right now, you're gonna get shot!
Everyone's pointing at him.
And so he was hit, and then he fell to the ground. There's been some controversy over whether he had a gun or he did not have a gun. What is your message to the Ross family about why that Sergeant Robbins, is still out on the streets?
You know, first of all, my message to the Ross family is I am sorry for the loss of your loved one. You know, anytime someone loses someone in this fashion, the hands of police, it is tragic. And I've met with moms before who have lost children, and their pain is real, and I acknowledge that and empathize with that. But there is so much more to that shooting that is available on our website through a report. The officers were actually responding to a call that Mr. Ross was out there shooting randomly out in public. And so they were responding to a cry for help from the residents there. And when they arrived, if you look, they asked Mr. Ross many, many times if he would stop, surrender. But here, their view is they had someone who had a gun, who was shooting, who actually had shot several rounds off in public, and they were trying to prevent the threat of death to anyone else. A gun was recovered. The gun was recovered by a paramedic who was treating Mr. Ross after he had been shot. And all of the details of this are on our website. Whenever we decline a case, if you ever want to know, and that's the one thing I would ask for the activists, could you at least go to our website, read the full story? Because that's the thing. Social media is wonderful. Social media is bad, right? Mm-hmm. Social media can be bad because it'll take one snippet and spin it, and you may not get the full story. So I'm encouraging people, read up for yourself. Don't let anyone tell you what to think. Go in, investigate, read that report, see what happened. And that's a case that, given the facts that you didn't get from looking at that video, that I would not have been able to legally even charge Sergeant Ross with using that deadly force.
Should there be some changes, because there's been some discussion about sort of his mental state, should there be some changes in terms of the way that police interact with people that may be having some mental challenges?
All right. Yes, there should be. And, you know, this is something that I've been working on since I got elected. For us, we see about anywhere from 25 to 30% of the people who are shot by police are people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. And when you're in that mental health crisis, it may be impossible to use the normal methods to reason with someone. And so we in the DA's office decided to take a leadership role, and we have a de-escalation class for officers to train them in what's called CIT training, crisis intervention training, which came out of Memphis years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's designed to teach officers how to approach a situation. Sometimes it's just giving it a little bit more time. Sometimes it's bringing a clinician, a trained clinician along with you. And as a result of our advocacy and our training, we now have more of these co-deployed teams throughout LA County. We now have more officers and first responders trained on how to deal with those situations. But look at what's going on in this situation. Here you had a guy, you knew he was shooting a gun. It's not that he's just armed with a gun. He's actually shooting a gun in broad daylight in a neighborhood. And in that particular case, I would not be able to charge someone with a crime in that kind.
There is a pretty big distance between what we can do as a mental health worker and when we call the police, how the police are trained. I've always been advocating for us to find some way to get people to be appropriately treated and followed, so when they decompensate, we have the legal authority to step in and get them properly treated. Yeah. As it is, we can do nothing, and so they continue to spiral, and then the police get summoned, and off we go.
All right, let me ask you about another issue. There's so much to get to. The issue of unions. and whether police unions are too powerful. Police unions which fund city council members, which fund you. Do you think police unions have too much power? Do you think it's too hard to fire a cop? And should there be somebody separate from that whole system that actually investigates police use of force, and maybe not you?
Well, what I would say is I defend any union's right to exercise their First Amendment rights. But what I want to know is when these cases are decided, the way it works in our office is the case doesn't come directly to me. It goes actually to a special unit. The lawyers evaluate the case, and they come in with the case evaluated and with a recommendation. And for me, it's just a matter of, do we file it or not, or do I endorse their recommendation? And as the leader, obviously, I'm responsible for that. But there's a lot of eyes that are not the elected official that are on cases like that. The other thing about the independent prosecutor is this. The San Francisco Chronicle had a great article this morning about how, and they were officer-involved shootings, how there have been 110 officers charged in 15 years, but only 5 convictions. And one of the things they said was the law, and the other thing that is impediment is jurors. Even if you have an independent prosecutor, I think they're still going to be bound by the law.
Yeah,
and that's how I roll. I mean, I follow the law.
And this week may change the way some jurors feel about this issue. George Floyd. That incident, when you watched that on tape, for you as an African American involved in the criminal justice system, as somebody who's made this the cause of your life, how did that impact you personally?
Well, I first looked at it, of course, as an African American woman who grew up from parents who left the South because of racism and Jim Crow, and brought me up to teach me that, hey, there's prejudice, there's racism. Black men were hanged just for looking at a white woman. And when I saw that scene of George Floyd with the officer with his foot on or his knee on his neck, I was angry. I felt, this is ridiculous. This is unnecessary. You were treating him as less than a man. As a prosecutor, I was equally outraged. We serve victims. People need to know that we serve victims. And watching that go down, it was clear that a crime was occurring. It was clear that that the man was in distress and that he could lose his life. Everything from his words that he uttered at the end to the look on the officer's face, the unfeeling look on his face, as though he weren't even concerned about the fact that this was a human being.
District Attorney Lacey, are you planning on meeting with Black Lives Matter?
I would like to meet with a smaller group, representatives of that. I have reached out to them several times. They have declined that. They have said, basically, I've got to come out and meet with a large group of protesters. I've tried that. My feeling is that we could get a lot more done if I were able to meet with the leaders, because then we'd be able to discuss in broader terms the principles and really figure out how can we build a better relationship. Because, it's my feeling that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I have the information, and I'm willing to give it.
All right, and if you had 20 seconds to make your pitch of why you over George Gascon, what's your pitch?
My dad taught me that as an African-American woman growing up in this country, I had to be twice as good as someone white who was seeking, doing my job. And because of that, I've worked so hard to push forth reforms, to do the right thing, to prosecute officers when appropriate, as well as other criminals. Mr. Gascon, he got lucky. He was a police officer for most of his life, and he got picked to lead that office without having tried a single case. I've tried 100 jury trials.
That was a long 20-second answer.
But thank you.
DA, thank you very much. At the Court Republican Team Talk, we appreciate it. We hope to talk with you more as this campaign goes on. It's an important discussion. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.